The millionaire confessed his bankruptcy at the crucial moment of the wedding. What the bride did surprised all the guests. The most luxurious banquet hall in New York had never hosted a ceremony as grandiose as that of Richard Matthews and Emily Foster. As Emily approached the altar, Richard felt the weight of the secret he had been carrying for weeks. His hands began to sweat. His mother, Mrs. Martha Matthews, seated in the front row, noticed her son's tension. She had always been his advisor in business and in life, but had not been informed of the true situation. Beside her, Richard's younger brother Jason fidgeted with his phone, seemingly disinterested in the ceremony. When Emily reached the altar, Richard took her hands in his. The officiant began the ceremony with words about commitment and honesty that seemed to pierce the groom's heart like needles. With each phrase about sharing joys and difficulties, Richard felt he couldn't continue with the charade. Before the vows were exchanged, the groom spoke up. His expression, once confident, now carried a shadow of apprehension. He looked into the bride's eyes and in front of everyone revealed, "I was betrayed by a partner I trusted, and I lost everything. I am no longer the rich man everyone imagines. If you still want to continue with me, it will be for who I am, not for what I have." A murmur ran through the hall. Guests exchanged incredulous looks, and some already anticipated a humiliating escape from the bride. The silence that followed was suffocating. The bride's eyes, previously moist with emotion, now reflected a whirlwind of feelings. For a few seconds she remained motionless, processing his words. Among the guests, a relative of the groom stood up and whispered to her, "Now you have a way out. No one will blame you if you leave." Another voice from the back mocked, "I knew this would happen." The bride closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and with a firm voice responded, "I didn't say yes to your fortune. I said yes to you. Life tests us in various ways, and if this is true, then we'll face it together." The turnaround shocked everyone. While some guests were still processing what they had just heard, the groom, visibly moved, embraced her tightly. But the unexpected was still to come. Before they could resume the ceremony, an unexpected man emerged from among the guests. Mark Wilson, Emily's ex-boyfriend, and a respected architect in Boston. He approached the altar with determined steps, ignoring the disapproving looks. "Now, you have a chance to change everything, Em. You don't need to be stuck in this situation. I always knew this marriage was a mistake," he declared, extending his hand to her. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out." Now continuing. Emily's face hardened as she faced Mark. 5 years ago, he had ended their relationship when she decided to move to New York in search of better professional opportunities. "If I wanted another life, I would have chosen it already, Mark. My choice is Richard, with or without money," she responded with dignity, turning back to her groom. Among the guests, a man stood up with a discreet smile. It was Victor Reynolds, an old partner of Richard who had distanced himself 2 years ago due to differences in business values. Tall and with an elegant bearing, he approached the altar and asked to speak. "Richard, your courage and honesty at this moment prove that I was wrong about you. I'm willing to resume our partnership and help you rebuild what was lost." In the middle of the crowd, a second man spoke up. Andrew Parker, the partner who had betrayed Richard. With a face red with indignation, he tried to justify himself. "I had no choice, Richard. It was just business, nothing personal. I protected my interests as anyone would in my place." Richard ignored him, turning his back on him in a gesture of contempt. George Foster, the bride's father, stood up confused and dismayed. The businessman from Chicago had spent practically all his savings on this wedding, believing he was uniting his daughter with one of the richest men in New York. "What does this mean? Was my daughter deceived?" he questioned with a voice trembling with anger. His wife, Nancy, pulled him by the sleeve, trying to make him sit down again and avoid a bigger scandal. Emily intervened quickly. "Dad, please." Richard was honest when he could have stayed silent. "This only shows the character of the man I've chosen." Her words, although sincere, did not seem to calm George, who saw his dreams of social ascension evaporating before his eyes. Martha Matthews, Richard's mother, approached her son with a serious expression. Widowed for 10 years, she had closely followed the construction of her son's real estate empire and could not believe what she had heard. "Why didn't you tell me, son? We could have found a solution together," she whispered, gripping his arm tightly. The officiant, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, tried to regain control. Perhaps it would be better to postpone the ceremony until... But he was interrupted by Emily, who with surprising determination declared, "We won't postpone anything. We're here to get married, and that's what we'll do." The news of Richard's confession spread quickly among the guests, many of whom began to whisper and discreetly take photos with their cell phones. Within minutes, social media was already buzzing with fragments of what had happened, distorted and amplified by the thirst for sensationalism. A journalist from a celebrity magazine, who was present as a guest of a mutual friend, was already frantically typing on her smartphone, preparing the article that would headline the next day's edition. Richard, realizing the dimension the event was taking, tried to calm the atmosphere. "I ask for everyone's understanding. This is an intimate moment that we decided to share with you. We respect those who wish to leave, but ask for the same respect in return." His words, although eloquent, did not prevent about a third of the guests from beginning to head for the exit, many without even disguising their disappointment or criticism. Among those who remained was Sarah Johnson, Emily's best friend since their days in architecture school. A university professor in New York, she had always been suspicious of Richard's intentions, believing he was just another rich playboy interested in her friend's beauty. Now she observed the scene with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Perhaps there was more to this man than she had imagined. The ceremony proceeded in a tense atmosphere, but charged with genuine emotion. When they were finally declared husband and wife, the kiss they exchanged seemed to seal not only their union, but a pact to face together the adversities they knew would come. The party that followed was more subdued than planned, with many of the dishes prepared by the renowned chef hired for the occasion being returned practically untouched. During the reception, Victor Reynolds approached Richard again, this time with a concrete proposal. "I have a new venture in the Hamptons. It's smaller than what we were used to, but it has potential. If you're interested, we can talk next week." Richard thanked him, feeling a thin thread of hope amid the chaos that had settled in his life. Meanwhile, Emily faced the discontent of her parents. Nancy, her mother, an elegant and discreet woman, tried to understand her daughter's decision. "You've always been independent, Emily, built your career on your own. Why tie yourself to a bankrupt man who deceived you until the last moment?" The architect tried to explain that Richard hadn't deceived her. He had the courage to reveal the truth when he could have simply remained silent and continued with the farce. George, for his part, was furious. "I spent everything I had on this wedding. And for what? To see my daughter marrying a man who doesn't have a penny to his name." His raised voice attracted glances, further increasing Emily's embarrassment. "Dad, please lower your voice. I have my own architecture firm. I can support myself. And Richard is a talented man. He'll get back on his feet," Emily responded, trying to maintain her composure. Deep down, however, reality was beginning to weigh on her. The penthouse apartment where they had planned to live would probably no longer be theirs. The honeymoon in the Maldives would have to be cancelled. The life she had dreamed of during the engagement was crumbling, and she needed to quickly adapt to a new reality. The day after the wedding, as expected, the newspapers published details about Richard's bankruptcy, exposing the entire situation and making the couple the target of speculation. The headline of New York's main newspaper read, "Millionaire reveals bankruptcy at the altar, scam or proof of love." The article, full of half-truths and assumptions, suggested that Richard might be hiding money abroad and that the whole episode could be an elaborate tax fraud. Emily's family, embarrassed by the exposure, tried to intervene. Nancy called early, suggesting that her daughter annul the marriage before it was too late. George went further, threatening to disinherit his daughter if she didn't come to her senses. But Emily remained firm in her decision, confronting her own relatives with a determination she didn't even know she possessed. Richard and Emily were staying in a luxury hotel, which they had reserved to spend the night after the party, before departing for their honeymoon. Now, sitting on the balcony of the presidential suite, they faced the harsh reality. Richard explained the extent of his problems. His partner, Andrew, had diverted millions from the company for high-risk personal investments, which failed miserably. When Richard discovered it, it was already too late. The company was drowning in debt. The properties they were building had their construction halted, and investors were demanding explanations and reimbursement. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Richard," asked Emily, holding her husband's hands between hers. There was no accusation in her voice, just the need to understand. "At first, I thought I could resolve everything before the wedding. I tried everything. I sought new investors, sold my personal assets, even took loans from loan sharks," he confessed, ashamed. "But with each passing day, the hole got bigger. When I realized I wouldn't be able to fix it in time, I thought about postponing the wedding. But then I saw how happy you were, how much your parents had invested. I was a coward, Em. I put off the conversation until I couldn't anymore." Emily hugged her husband tightly. "It wasn't cowardice. It was fear of losing me. But now we're in this together, and we'll find a way out." Her words were sincere, but deep down she also felt afraid of the uncertain future awaiting them. Faced with the new reality, they made a difficult decision: to cancel the wedding celebration to avoid more unnecessary expenses. They didn't need luxury, just each other. But amid all this, an unexpected hope emerged. Richard discovered that an investment he thought was lost could be legally recovered as long as he made a risky decision. It was a property in the Hamptons that Richard had acquired years before when he was starting his career. At the time, the area wasn't highly valued, but with the development of the region, it had become a coveted property. Andrew had included this property in the company's assets without Richard's knowledge, trying to use it as collateral for one of his failed schemes. However, due to a bureaucratic error, the transfer was never legally completed. If Richard could prove that the property was still his personal asset, it couldn't be used to pay the company's debts. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Determined to start from scratch, the two decided to temporarily move to the beach house that Sarah, Emily's friend, owned in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It was a simple but cozy place, far from the spotlight of the press that continued to pursue them. Even with all the difficulties, they began to make plans together, combining their skills to rebuild their lives. Emily, who had always had an architecture firm focused on luxury interior projects, realized she would need to adapt her business model. Using her contacts and experience, she began offering online interior design consultations at affordable prices, reaching a much larger audience than before. Her creativity and talent quickly attracted clients, even without the glamour and status that previously surrounded her. Richard, in turn, needed to completely reinvent himself. Accustomed to managing million-dollar ventures, he now sought more modest opportunities. It was Victor Reynolds who offered him the first real chance to start over, a minority stake in a small, eco-friendly condominium in the Hamptons. The project, although much smaller than anything Richard had ever done, was aligned with values he had always appreciated but never had time to explore: sustainability, connection with nature, and quality of life. The groom, however, knew that recovering his investment in the Hamptons would require more than patience. He discovered that the company now claiming ownership of the property, a holding indirectly controlled by Andrew, was about to commit a $1 million fraud, selling the same property to multiple foreign investors. With concrete evidence in hand, he could sue them, but that would take years and the legal costs would be enormous. Instead, he decided to use his discovery as a bargaining chip. With the help of a lawyer friend from college days, he contacted the real investors interested in the property, exposing the situation. He proposed a deal. In exchange for his silence and relinquishing any claim to the property, he demanded financial compensation that represented approximately 40% of the property's market value. The risk was high. If the company decided to confront him, he could end up with nothing and still face defamation lawsuits. But his courage and intelligence were decisive. After weeks of tense negotiations, Richard managed to close the deal. It wasn't the fortune he once possessed, but it would be enough to pay the most urgent debts and have initial capital to start over. Meanwhile, the relationship between Emily and her parents remained strained. George refused to speak to his daughter, considering himself betrayed and humiliated. Nancy, although more understanding, also kept her distance, torn between her love for her daughter and loyalty to her husband. It was Sarah who served as an intermediary, trying gradually to re-establish the broken family ties. The situation became more complicated when George's textile company began to face difficulties. The investment in his daughter's wedding, combined with problems in the sector and poor management in recent years, brought the business to the brink of bankruptcy. Too proud to ask for help, George found himself in the same situation he had so criticized in Richard, a businessman on the verge of ruin. It was Emily who first noticed the severity of the situation when she realized that her mother had cancelled an annual trip she took with friends, citing health problems. Concerned, she pressured Sarah until her friend revealed what she knew. Her father's company was for sale at a price far below market value in a desperate attempt to avoid complete bankruptcy. Without consulting Richard, Emily traveled to Chicago to confront her parents. She found them in a situation she never imagined. The luxurious house where she grew up was half empty, with spaces marked on the walls where valuable paintings had been sold. Nancy, always impeccable, seemed to have aged years in just a few months. George, the confident businessman she knew, now seemed like a defeated man. "Why didn't you ask for help?" questioned Emily, after finally extracting the truth from her parents. "How could we ask for help from the daughter we rejected when she needed us most?" replied Nancy with tears in her eyes. George remained silent, pride still fighting against necessity. Back in Cape Cod, Emily shared her parents' situation with Richard. To her surprise, her husband didn't hesitate. "We need to help them, Em. I know exactly how your father is feeling right now." The money they had obtained with the deal in the Hamptons would be enough to give the textile company some breathing room, but that would mean postponing their own stabilization plans. "Are you sure, Richard? They treated you so badly." Emily was moved by her husband's generosity, especially considering the treatment he had received from her parents. "I am. Family is family, Em, and now they're my family too." The offer of help, however, was not initially well received by George. "I don't need handouts from that bankrupt," he raged, when Nancy suggested accepting support from their daughter and son-in-law. It took several conversations, some quite heated, until the Chicago businessman finally understood that it wasn't about charity, but about family solidarity. The solution found was a partnership. Richard would use his experience in restructuring companies to help reorganize the textile business, while Emily would develop a line of decoration using the fabrics produced by her father's company, thus uniting their talents with the family tradition. The financial contribution would be treated as an investment, not as a loan or donation. Months passed, and slowly, both the couple's life and George's company began to stabilize. The small condominium in the Hamptons, where Richard now worked with Victor, was progressing well, attracting buyers interested in a sustainable lifestyle. The decoration line developed by Emily gained prominence in specialized magazines, bringing a new dimension to her father's business. More importantly, family ties were being restored. George, although still reserved with his son-in-law, began to respect him for his competence and dedication. Nancy rediscovered in her daughter not only the talented professional, but the strong and determined woman she had helped to raise. It was during this period of relative calm that Andrew Parker, the ex-partner who had betrayed Richard, resurfaced. His holding company was under investigation for tax fraud, and he was desperately seeking allies who could testify in his favor, or at least not contribute to his conviction. He approached Richard with an indecent proposal. In exchange for his silence, he offered information about assets of the old company that could still be recovered. "Why would I help the man who destroyed everything I built?" questioned Richard, maintaining his composure despite the anger he felt at seeing again the man who had betrayed him. "Because you're smart, Matthews. You know this is an opportunity to recover more than you got with that little deal in the Hamptons," replied Andrew, with the same arrogant smile he had always worn. Richard refused to make any deal, but Andrew's visit brought up an important question. Were there really other assets that could be recovered? With the help of Victor and the same lawyer who had assisted him previously, he began a discreet investigation. They discovered that yes, there was a large property in Aspen, registered in the name of a shell company, which actually belonged to Richard and Andrew's construction company. Recovering this asset would be much more complex than the property in the Hamptons, as it would involve proving in court the fraud committed by Andrew. It would be a long and expensive process, with no guarantees of success. Moreover, while the action was in progress, the property would be blocked, unable to be sold or developed, which meant that, even if winning, Richard could take years to see any financial return. "Is it worth it, Richard?" asked Emily, concerned about the emotional toll that a legal battle with Andrew could cause. They were finally finding balance in their lives, building something new together. Going back to dealing with the past could compromise this progress. "I don't know, Em. It's not just about the money, it's about justice. About not allowing him to go unpunished after everything he did," replied Richard, torn between the desire for revenge and the wisdom to leave the past behind. The decision became even more complicated when Emily discovered she was pregnant. The news, which in other circumstances would be received with pure joy, brought with it practical concerns. How would they provide their child with the comfort and security they desired? Would the small apartment they now rented in New York be enough for a growing family? Would the income that was beginning to stabilize handle the new expenses? "A child changes everything, Richard," said Emily, caressing her still flat belly. "We need to think about the future, not the past." Her words deeply touched her husband, who began to reconsider his priorities. Emily's pregnancy served as a catalyst for complete reconciliation with her parents. George, upon learning he would be a grandfather, set aside the last remnants of resentment. Nancy, emotional, immediately began planning the baby's room, using the finest fabrics produced by the family company. It was during a family lunch when they were discussing names for the baby that George surprised everyone with a proposal. "You'll need a bigger house. The land next to the factory is empty. If you want, it can be yours. Emily can design the house as she always dreamed." The offer was generous and solved a practical problem, but it also meant a commitment to Chicago, away from Richard's new projects in the Hamptons and Emily's growing New York clientele. "We need to think carefully, Dad," she replied, grateful but cautious. "Our life is being rebuilt in New York." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Us who are just starting out, now continuing. While the couple pondered George's offer, unexpected news arrived. Andrew Parker had been placed in preventive detention, accused of tax fraud and embezzlement. The police operation that captured him revealed a much larger scheme than Richard had imagined, involving influential politicians and businessmen. Among the evidence seized were documents proving that the property in Aspen had been acquired with money diverted from the construction company. With Andrew imprisoned and evidence of fraud exposed, the process of recovering the property became much simpler. The judge responsible ordered the immediate freezing of the asset and initiated procedures to return it to its rightful owners, in this case, Richard and other minority partners who had also been harmed by Andrew. The turnaround brought not only the possibility of faster financial recovery than they expected, but also a sense of justice being done. Richard, however, did not feel the satisfaction he had imagined. Seeing his ex-friend and partner imprisoned, with his life destroyed, brought him more grief than joy. "You know what's strange, Em? For years I imagined Andrew being punished, losing everything like I lost. I thought that would bring me peace. But now, I can only think of his family, of the children who will grow up with their father in prison," confessed Richard, one night as they talked about recent events. Emily, now with a small 4-month baby bump, hugged her husband. "That just shows the kind of man you are, my love, capable of empathy even with those who hurt you. That's why I chose you at that altar, and would choose you 1,000 times more." Emily's pregnancy progressed, bringing joys and challenges. Morning sickness compromised her productivity at work. The anticipation for the baby made the decision about where they would live more urgent. The property in Aspen, although valuable, was still in legal proceedings and did not represent an immediate solution to their needs. It was Victor Reynolds who presented an interesting alternative. The condominium in the Hamptons had attracted larger investors, interested in expanding the concept to other areas. One of them offered to buy Richard's stake for a value that, while not making him a millionaire again, would provide enough financial comfort for the couple to choose their next step with tranquility. "It's a good opportunity, Richard," Victor opined during a visit to the construction site. "You could use part of the money to buy a decent house in New York, save another part for the baby's future, and still have enough left to invest in a new project if you want." Richard hesitated. The condominium in the Hamptons represented more than an investment. It was the symbol of his fresh start, of the possibility of building something meaningful even after losing everything. Selling it would be like giving up that milestone in his journey of recovery. On the other hand, Emily's parents' proposal also attracted him. Chicago offered an excellent quality of life. The cost of living was lower than New York, and proximity to family would be beneficial when the baby was born. Additionally, George's textile company was recovering well, with the decoration line developed by Emily, bringing a new dynamic to the business. "What do you really want, Richard?" asked Emily one night, as they dined in their small rented apartment. "Regardless of money, practicality, comfort, what is your dream now?" The question caught Richard by surprise. In recent months, he had been so focused on surviving, on rebuilding a minimum of stability, that he hadn't allowed himself to dream again. I want to create something lasting, something our child can be proud of, not for its size or value, but for its meaning." This reflection led Richard to an unexpected decision. He refused both the offer to buy his stake in the Hamptons condominium and his father-in-law's proposal to build in Chicago. Instead, he proposed something different. He would use the money he had recovered from the Hamptons property to buy a small inn for sale in Montauk, near the condominium where he worked. The property, although needing renovations, had potential to become a family business, combining Richard's knowledge in hospitality, a sector he knew well from his days as a resort builder, with Emily's talent for interior design. It would be a smaller business than both were accustomed to, but entirely theirs, without partners or external investors. "An inn? Are you sure?" questioned Emily, surprised by the idea. "I never imagined you as an inn owner." There was a tone of amusement in her voice, but also genuine curiosity about this new direction her husband was proposing. "Neither did I," admitted Richard with a smile. "But the more I think about it, the more sense it makes. It's a business we can manage together that allows us to put down roots in an amazing place where our child can grow up in touch with nature. And most importantly, it's something we would build from scratch with our own values and vision." The idea, initially, received with skepticism by George. "Trading New York for a little historic town? Have you lost your minds?" Gained strength when Emily developed the inn renovation project, transforming what was an old building without personality into a charming retreat that blended Montauk's coastal architecture with contemporary and sustainable touches. The months that followed were of intense work. Richard divided his time between supervising the construction of the condominium, where he still maintained his stake, and renovating the inn. Emily, already in the third trimester of pregnancy, remotely managed her architecture firm in New York, while developing every detail of the new family business. Sarah, always present as a friend and confidant, was the first to notice how much that change had transformed the couple. "You seem lighter," she commented during a visit to Montauk. Watching Richard and Emily animatedly discuss the rustic furniture they would order from a local craftsman. "Even with all this rush, all the work, you're happier than I've ever seen you." The observation was accurate. The loss of fortune, which at first had seemed like an insurmountable disaster, had ended up forcing Richard and Emily to rediscover what they really valued. Not status, luxury, or appearances, but the possibility of building something meaningful together, something that reflected their deepest values and aspirations. At 8 months of pregnancy, Emily decided it was time to settle permanently in Montauk. The doctor who was monitoring her in New York had recommended rest in the final weeks, and the constant travel between the two cities had become exhausting. With Sarah's help, she organized the move, taking only the essentials to the temporary house they had rented near the inn under renovation. George and Nancy, who initially resisted the idea of their daughter moving to a small coastal town, came to visit them and were positively surprised. The natural beauty of Montauk, the peaceful quality of life, and the couple's enthusiasm for the new venture ended up winning over even the pragmatic Chicago businessman. "Maybe you're not as crazy as I thought," admitted George, as Richard proudly showed every detail of the inn under renovation. "There's something special here, something money can't buy." It was the closest to a blessing Richard could hope for from his father-in-law. It was during this visit that Emily felt the first contractions. Although there were still 3 weeks until the due date, the baby apparently decided it was time to come into the world. The nearest hospital with a neonatal ICU was in Southampton, an hour away along the winding roads of Long Island. The rush that followed united the family like never before. Richard, trying to stay calm but visibly nervous, drove while Nancy, in the back seat with her daughter, timed the increasingly frequent contractions. George, who under normal circumstances would criticize his daughter's lack of planning in being so far from an adequate medical center, maintained a tense silence, only holding Emily's hand when the pain intensified. They arrived at the hospital in time, but only by a few minutes. Michael, as they decided to name the boy, was born healthy and strong, with Richard's dark eyes and, according to Nancy, the same delicate nose that Emily had as a baby. The birth of their grandson definitively sealed the family reconciliation, transforming old grudges into renewed bonds. In the days that followed, while Emily and the baby remained in the hospital for observation, Richard divided himself between constant visits to his family and the urgent completion of the inn's renovations. He wanted everything to be ready to receive his wife and son when they returned to Montauk. With the unexpected help of George, who used his contacts to expedite deliveries and hiring, he managed to finish the basic renovations in time. The inn, named New Dawn, a name that symbolized both the couple's fresh start and the sunrise that could be magnificently seen from its front porch, was ready to begin operations. The decision about the Aspen property was finally resolved. The judge ordered its sale in a judicial auction, with the resources being divided among the wronged partners. The part that would go to Richard didn't represent a fortune, but would be an important complement to the investments already made in the inn, ensuring a financial reserve for unforeseen events and future expansions. 6 months after Michael's birth, the inn received its first guests. The combination of rustic charm created by Emily with the warm hospitality supervised by Richard quickly won over visitors, generating recommendations and advance reservations for the high season. Victor Reynolds, who continued as Richard's partner in the eco-friendly condominium, now practically completed and with almost all units sold, became a frequent visitor to the inn, bringing potential investors interested in the sustainable model they had implemented in both ventures. It was during one of these visits that Victor presented Richard with an unexpected proposal to expand the inn's concept to other locations on the American coast, creating a network of small, sustainable hotels, each respecting local characteristics, but sharing the same philosophy of conscious hospitality. Think about it, Richard. I'm not talking about a giant impersonal chain. It would be at most 5 or 6 inns, all managed by people who share our vision. You would be the mentor of the project, the guardian of the concept, explained Victor, enthusiastic about the idea he had been developing for months. Richard hesitated. The inn in Montauk was doing well, but it was still a young venture, requiring constant attention. Michael had just turned 6 months old, and Emily divided her time between motherhood and supervising the inn's interior design, while maintaining some selected clients from her architecture firm. Taking on more responsibilities seemed risky at that moment. You don't need to decide now, reassured Victor, perceiving his friend's hesitation. Think about it. Talk to Emily. The idea is not to overburden you, but to create something that can grow organically, at the right time. Once again, it was Emily who surprised Richard with her vision. Instead of caution, She showed enthusiasm for Victor's proposal. "This isn't just a business opportunity, Richard. It's the chance to amplify the positive impact we're generating. Here, imagine how many local communities could benefit, how many guests could experience a more conscious form of tourism." Emily's excitement was contagious, but Richard maintained reservations. "What if we grow too fast? What if we lose control of the quality, the essence of what we built here? Remember what my life was like before, always chasing the next big deal without time to really appreciate what I had already achieved?" The conversation extended for days, with the couple weighing pros and cons, dreams and fears. In the end, they reached a shared decision. They would accept Victor's proposal, but with clear conditions. They would expand gradually, one inn at a time, ensuring that each new unit was aligned with their fundamental values before moving on to the next step. The first expansion would be in Nantucket, a few hours by ferry from Montauk. Victor had already identified a promising property, an old fisherman's house that could be transformed into an intimate inn, integrated with the exuberant nature of the island. Emily immediately began sketching ideas, imagining how she could preserve the authenticity of the construction while adapting it to offer the comfort their guests expected. While plans for expansion took shape, life in Montauk followed its course. Michael grew healthy and curious, enchanted by the sea he could see from the house's porch and by the colorful boats that sailed across the bay. George and Nancy visited. Frequently, the businessman now completely won over by the lifestyle he had previously criticized. The textile company in Chicago was finally stabilized, allowing the couple to consider semi-retirement, spending longer periods with their daughter and grandson. The news that Andrew Parker had been sentenced to 12 years in prison arrived without causing great commotion. Richard received the information with a mixture of relief and regret. Relief that a painful chapter was finally closing. Regret for the waste of talent and potential that his ex-partner's greed represented. "Have you ever thought about visiting him?" asked Emily one night as they contemplated the starry sky of Montauk from their house's porch. The question surprised Richard, who had never considered such a possibility. "Why? What good would that bring?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Maybe real closure. Maybe the chance to show that you've moved on, that you've built something meaningful from the ruins he left." There was wisdom in Emily's words, as always. Richard promised to think about it without committing. The opportunity to confront the past came sooner than expected. With the expansion to Nantucket underway, Richard needed to return to New York for meetings with potential investors interested in the project. During his stay in the city, he received an unexpected phone call. Sophia, Andrew's ex-wife, was asking to meet him. The meeting took place in a discreet cafe in the East Village. Sophia, whom Richard had known in the prosperous days of the construction company, seemed aged and tired, but maintained the elegance and proud posture of always. "Andrew asked me to find you," she explained after initial greetings. "He wants to see you." Richard felt a chill in his stomach. The last person he imagined meeting was Andrew. Why? What could he want with me after everything he did? His voice, normally controlled, revealed the tension that the mere mention of his ex-partner still provoked. "He's sick, Richard," Sophia replied with a grave voice. "He doesn't know how much time he has left, and he's trying to make peace with his past." The news hit Richard like a punch. Despite everything, he couldn't feel satisfaction with the suffering of someone he had once considered a friend. After consulting Emily by phone and reflecting at length, Richard decided to honor the request. The visit to the prison was a surreal experience. The man he found in the visiting room barely resembled the confident and charismatic Andrew he had known. Thin, pale, with deep dark circles under his eyes, he seemed a shadow of himself. "Thank you for coming," said Andrew with a weak voice but still carrying vestiges of his former arrogance. "I didn't expect you to accept." Richard remained silent, waiting for his ex-partner to explain why he had requested that meeting. "I'm dying, Richard. Terminal cancer. Ironic, isn't it? All that money, all that power I sought, and in the end they're useless." There was bitterness in his words, but also something that Richard had rarely seen in Andrew. Regret. The conversation that followed was painful, full of late confessions and explanations that, while not justifying Andrew's actions, at least shed light on his motivations. He spoke about his poor childhood, about the constant fear of returning to poverty, about how that fear had led him to accumulate more and more without ever feeling secure enough. I envied you, you know, not for your success, which was also mine, but for your inner peace, for your ability to sleep soundly at night. So even when business wasn't going well, confessed Andrew, surprising Richard, you always knew how to separate who you were from what you owned. I could never do that. At the end of the meeting, Andrew made an unexpected request. He wanted Richard to talk to his eldest son, Lucas, a 19-year-old who was following the same ambitious steps as his father. I don't want him to make my mistakes, Richard. I don't want him to learn too late that some things are more important than money and power. Richard left the prison with mixed feelings. On one hand, he felt strangely relieved, as if a weight he had carried for years had been partially removed. On the other, the sight of Andrew withering away, paying for his mistakes in the most painful way possible, had left him deeply disturbed. Upon returning to Montauk and sharing the experience with Emily, she hugged him for a long time before saying, "You did the right thing, my love. Not for him, but for yourself. Now you can really turn this page." Emily's words, as always, touched the heart of the matter. The meeting with Andrew represented the definitive closure of a painful chapter in his life. The past, with its glories and tragedies, could finally rest where it belonged, allowing the present and future to occupy the center of his attention. In the months that followed, the expansion to Nantucket materialized successfully. The small inn named Open Sea quickly found its place, attracting guests who sought an authentic experience connected to nature and local culture. The sustainable business model developed by Richard and Emily proved viable not only in Montauk but potentially in other destinations along the American coast. When Michael turned 2, a special ceremony was organized at the New Dawn Inn to celebrate not only the boy's birthday but also the success of the family business. Among the guests, besides close friends and family, were several frequent guests who had become almost part of the family, and employees who from the beginning believed in the project. During the party, Richard watched his son running on the beach sand, chasing seagulls under Nancy's watchful eye, while Emily chatted animatedly with Sarah about plans for the third inn, now in the initial design phase. George, surprisingly, was discussing sustainability with Victor, showing genuine interest in practices he would previously have considered hippie stuff. In that moment, contemplating the life he had built from the ruins of his lost empire, Richard felt a deep gratitude for the path traveled. The revelation at the altar, which at the time had seemed like the end of everything, had proved to be the true beginning. The material loss, painful as it was, had made room for much more significant gains, a partnership based on true love, not appearances, genuine friendships, not self-interested connections, a purpose aligned with his deepest values, not external expectations. Night was falling over Montauk, tinting the sky with orange hues that reflected on the calm waters of the bay. Richard approached Emily, wrapping his arm around her waist as they contemplated the sunset together. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear. "For what?" she asked, turning to face him. "For staying at that altar. For choosing the man, not the fortune," he responded, with eyes misty with contained emotion. Emily smiled, that same smile that had illuminated the banquet hall 3 years ago, when everyone expected her to flee humiliated, and instead she had chosen love above all. "It was the best decision I ever made," she replied simply, kissing him tenderly. And in that kiss was contained the entire journey they had traveled together, the pain of loss, the courage of starting over, the joy of small daily achievements, the peace of finally finding their true place in the world. Michael ran to them, hugging his parents' legs with the inexhaustible energy of a happy child. George and Nancy approached, bringing the birthday cake that would be cut at sunset, following the tradition they had established since the inn's inauguration. Victor raised his glass in a silent toast, recognizing in his friend's serene happiness the greatest proof of success that could exist. The empire of concrete and speculation that Richard had built and lost now seemed to belong to another life, almost like a distant dream. What he had now, a united family, a business aligned with his values, a community that respected him not for the size of his bank account, but for the positive impact he generated, was infinitely more valuable and, paradoxically, more secure, for it was built on foundations that no economic crisis or betrayal could destroy: true love, authentic purpose, and the deep understanding of what really matters in life. End of story. Dear listener, what did you think of Richard and Emily's journey? This couple shows us that sometimes we lose something valuable only to gain something even more precious. Have you ever been in a situation where an apparent disaster transformed into a blessing in disguise? Do you think Emily made the right choice by staying with Richard even after learning he had lost everything? We'd love to know your opinion. Don't forget to leave your like, share this story with someone who needs to hear this message of hope, and especially subscribe to the channel to follow other moving stories like this one. Your company is what motivates us to continue. Until next time.